Not to say that we're like advocating for corporal punishment, just
Oh,
saying
of
that it
course
builds a
not.
little bit of character.
A lot of character. I
Yeah.
would kind of feel sad if they take it away just because it's what are you doing? You're taking away this part of the child's childhood, but
Yeah.
I guess it's also like
Back in my days, back in my days, we lined up at the back of the wall and got hit by our teacher.
literally.
Head in class. Ba-dum, ba-dum. In school and stuff, do you think like people still formed like cliques based on what language they kind of used primarily?
You mean right now in the US or
Oh
like when
no.
I was
Back then, yeah.
back then? Yes, yes, actually. I think the people that I um hung out with the most back in like when I was like 13, 14, when I was like in public school at that point, um, they were more English speaking, and literally that's what they call us. You're English speaking kids.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned at the very beginning of this
Mhm.
session, that language also kind of shows like your status.
Mhm.
English is actually, at least like in a lot of places in Malaysia, English is seen as like you either being posh or like you're up in like the economic
Right.
class, because it's, to them it's not necessarily a foreign language because we still use it in Malaysia.
Mhm.
It's still used in like regulations and stuff like that, but it's not the national language. It's not the first language that you should speak. So for them, they were like, "Oh, this like I growing up, a lot of kids just saw me as a rich kid just because of the way I spoke."
Yeah.
And so for them, they're like, "Oh yeah, Nuha has like a lot of money and stuff like that." So for me to blend into um school and like people, it was harder because they will always be like, "Oh, don't mess with Nuha because she's like, well, if her parents are gonna like come at you and stuff." And I'm like,
Wow.
"You know what? Yeah, sure, leave. Fuck off. I don't like people anyway."
Nuha.
So people are like, "Did you grow up in Oregon?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a national student, but okay."
Yeah. Yeah, like even when you're speaking with like other Malaysians, I think you don't really use things like lah and things like that, right?
No, I try
Yeah.
very hard to not make them uncomfortable when I try to speak to them because they would be like full blown just using all their slang, all their
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
vernaculars and stuff like that. And I'll just be like speaking like how I am speaking right now. And it's just really awkward for them because they're like, why
Yeah.
aren't you
And they think
communicating?
you're
And
like being pretentious, you know?
exactly, that was how it was like growing up, like especially in secondary school, like from 1, from 2, like 13, 14 ish. They're like, why is this kid speaking English? I'm like, because that's what I speak. I'm not trying to be like over the top, trying to be like above you guys. I'm not like trying to be this gigantic bird going like, I am a lot better than all you people. It's just that like that's just how I, that's my preference. That's what I grew up with. And
Yeah.
mm,
I mean, we both know that in Malaysia, like English is glorified, kind of. Maybe we could trace it back to like colonization, to like, you know, like that kind of like Western worshiping kind of
yep,
thing.
yep.
There's definitely a lot of history in it, but I think in general, like people all like in a lot of parts of Asia, like people will think that people who speak English super fluently or they use it as their main language, you know, they're considered like more proper or have a better status or something like that. And
Mm-hmm,
people still want their kids to study English as their first language, like today. Like
mm-hmm,
I've met like quite a lot of people who are like really proud that their kids speak English, you know, and they only speak English to them even if their own English like sucks. No offense to the people I've met.
mm-hmm.
Like I don't know, like what do you think of the ideal of like valuing English ed people and like English in general more?
I think
What are your thoughts on the idea of English being sort of seen as more superior in Malaysia?
it shouldn't be seen as a superior thing, but I do think like it should be more integrated in like households, not just because I'm like English is my first language. It is. But anyway, it's more of like it helps you, it makes you think differently, if that makes sense. Like the
Yeah.
language that you grow up with or the language that you primarily speak, it shapes the way you think, shapes the way you do
Yes.
things because I don't know why it does that.
No, it
But
does. It does. Yeah.
but I think um yeah, because I definitely think a lot differently from people who are Malay speaking like their entire lives, or they like speak a bit of English and stuff like that just because like they had to do it for school and stuff like that. Just and like identity wise, like our ethnicity, we're the same, religion wise, we're the same, like we all like lived in the same area, but like the language that we grew up speaking are like different. And I don't know, I think English in a way, at least in Malaysia, it makes you a lot more open-minded, I would say, and more like globalized. Because if you only speak in Malay, and that's like the only media that you consume, the only type of people that you like meet, your thinking and like your experiences are just definitely going to be local, which is fine. But Malaysia is just such a small country. Like if you want to live there your entire life, then that's completely fine. But also, it goes back to that like narrow-minded mindset.
Mhm.
And the same goes with like if you speak in just Tamil or if you speak just in Mandarin or just in Hokkien or Hakka or something like that. It's like you stick to your little tiny community, and that doesn't help when it comes to like if a person just suddenly hops into your life and you're like, what, that's a weird alien, what is that? It doesn't speak my language, it doesn't think the way I do, it doesn't like experience the same things I do, and then therefore I don't know,
Yeah.
segregation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I would say if like people wanting to integrate English into like their daily lives of like their kids or like their siblings or anything like that, or just them themselves, I don't think it's a bad idea just because it's such a universal language and it helps you with like learning more about a lot of um, other things outside of your own country. I don't know if
Yeah.
that answered the question, but
No, I think that answers it really well. I agree. I think, I think one of the main arguments comes from the defensiveness people feel about their own cultures. Like that's
mm,
kind of like the point with like Chinese schools in the beginning, you know? It's like because these people felt protective or defensive about continuing their own cultures, they don't want to like have it disappear because of like the majority or because of like the government or anything like that.
mm,
And I think that's probably how like most like Malay or Malay speakers feel as well. It's like the idea of
mm,
globalization is important, of course, in today's like landscape. And
mm,
English definitely has a lot more resources. Like you can learn a lot more because there's a lot more written in English and a lot more provided to you in English. And
mm,
I'm sure some people will see that as a westernization of the world, and I guess it is, like globalization in our universe is pretty much just westernization, and we can't really help it at this point. It's already like past. Like
mm,
we can of like the only way I think that you can at this point, like that's how I think is the only way that you can really uplift our own like Malay voices, Malaysian community and voices and opinions and all that is to play the game their way, right? Is to speak English and then introduce it through that. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to be proud of your own upbringing or your own linguistic background. But of
mm,
course, like people get super defensive about stuff like this because it does feel like a rejection of like identity and like history and like we were
mm,
colonized, all of that stuff. But I totally agree with the idea that like language just really kind of dissociates us from one another, from each other.
mm,
Because when I see like Facebook posts that my mom sent that are like in completely like traditional Chinese, I'm like,
mm,
what the hell? Like, I don't understand the comments. Like, they're mad about something, and I can kind of
Mhm.
get it, but like I don't know what they're mad about. And so like
Mhm.
even the whole news cycle in different communities are completely different. And as like a journalism student, or I'm
Mhm.
not a student anymore, but
Mhm.
it's like wow, that's just dividing the country so much. Like you're getting literally different news just based on the language you speak because the entire community is different. Your
Mhm.
whole opinion is just different. So it
Mhm.
further divides you and stuff like that. So like that's the thing about like categories or labels, I guess. It's kind of like on one hand it's nice sometimes. Like okay, let's start with like the not good things about like, just like pushing someone into a category. It's like obviously you're kind of just
Mhm.
limiting them and, creating stereotypes for them. But on another hand, like I especially like after I went to the US, like I realized, like it's always nice to meet other Malaysians or other international students because it gives the sense of like belonging
Mm.
and a sense of understanding. And I think that's particularly mm, prominent when you are part of an out group or
Mhm.
part of the outsiders and you feel like you don't belong in like general society or something like that.
Mhm.
So that could be a reason why like people like just like really want to hold on to like what they speak, be it like
Mhm.
dialects or stuff like that as well, because it's just like when you find someone who speaks the same way as you do, you're like, ah, yeah, you get me, like you said, language really does define your worldview because of the vocabulary, because of the culture, the society.
Mhm.
So it really just like it helps you feel like, oh yeah, you get me. But
Mhm.
yeah, in terms of assimilation, I agree. It's like because it's when done wrong, like it's kind of just like an ethnic erasure in some sense.
Mhm.
Like it's kind of like stripping down certain things that are important to people because language is so deeply connected to culture and to communities. But and I think sometimes, it's easy to see, for example, Chinese people, like me, obviously, to see them as like, okay, yeah, but it's not ethnic erasure because you're part of like a huge group of Chinese people in the world. Like they're still like such a big existing group of people that share your values. But I'm not Chinese, like mainland China people are.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm. I agree.
yeah, I can't go there and feel at home. Like I can't just move there. Like I'm from Malaysia. Like I'm both parts like Chinese and Malaysian. And like they're like
Mhm.
different things. It's like my ethnicity and my nationality. And it's like both parts can definitely still be celebrated or like kept, but
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of solution would allow that. I don't know. Confusing.
I have no idea either.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, at the end of the day, we're a multicultural country.
Yeah.
That's what we like say all the time. Like that's how we promote ourselves. It's kind of like America, trying to call itself a melting pot. Like so we should just be nice to one another. We all literally belong here. Like I literally cannot go back to China. I literally know nobody in China. It's not like I'm a fucking okay, I shouldn't curse. It's not like I'm like an immigrant or something, right? So like we're all just Malaysian at the end of the day, but there is still room for us to have our own unique communities. I don't know. It's always like really easy to be like, "Oh yeah, we should all just like come together and like Satu Malaysia and like whatever." But like
I never ever believed that because they were like they will always say like Satu Malaysia and I was like, yeah, sure.
mhm. Yeah.
That's I never believed it. 12-year-old me was like, they're all saying things that you don't mean. Using
Yeah. Yeah.
Indian government. I don't know.
I don't know. It's I don't know because yeah, it's very complex in Malaysia because there's always people saying like okay, but the Chinese people are dominating the economy, right? Like the top 10 or whatever people richest people is all Chinese. So they're like, okay, so you guys are like privileged. You can't play like the minority card, which is like kind of true. But like systemically speaking, like in government, like the representation in that sense is
Mhm.
kind of different,
Mm.
and like at the end of the day, a lot of Bhumi Putras like they still do get certain benefits, but like we want to. I'm sure a lot of us want to be part of like a meritocracy meritocracy. I don't know, man. Like Singapore, where it's just based on like your merits and stuff. But we can't just change like that because politics, I guess.
Yes, it's definitely politics in terms of the whole Bumi Putra thing. And as a Bumi Putra, I feel really bad saying Bumi Putra because I'm like, ugh, those Bumi Putras. But then I'm like, oh yeah, that's myself. Disgusting. We get discounts on things, just for being a Bumi Putra. And that is, it's not racism, it's ethnicity-ism. I don't know.
Right.
We're just going to stick with that, even though I don't think that's an actual, like, legal word. But
Yeah.
I'm going to stick with
Ethnocentrism, yeah. You
yes.
can say
There we
that,
go.
I guess.
But I think going back to what you said about Chinese being like dominating the economic realm of things,
Mhm.
I would say that also goes back to culture and language and that shaping the way you experience things and do things because people are always like, oh, the Chinese are rich, the Malays are lazy, and the Indians are just like there.
Right.
And we're not even like considering like the Orang Asli, like our
Mhm.
actual natives that still live in the forests and stuff like that. And they're pretty nice people, I would say,
Mhm.
living in their little wooden houses in the middle. They do live in the wooden houses, and they're very pretty. And like in the forest and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think it just goes back to that whole topic of your language and your culture pushing you to be where you are in the economic realm and stuff like that. Just because I grew up in like a Chinese school, as we talked about at the very beginning, and it's very different from regular public Malay-centric schools because they really push you to get like 100%. They really push you to be perfect in a way, not just for girls, because I know like there's been lots of topics about how females are more pushed to be perfect, whereas boys are more pushed to be brave. But in growing up in a Chinese school, it was everyone had to be
Yeah.
perfect.
Just get
Everyone
good
had to
grades, yeah.
get good grades, get that whatever stuff.
Yeah.
And like super disciplined, like super punctual and stuff like that. And if you don't do those things, you do get punished, and in a way that's not just shameful, but they literally hurt. They literally just bring like
Yeah.
rotan with you and like canes, like just
Yes.
hitting you, and you're like 8.
Yeah, you're like, what the hell?
I mean, technically, growing up with that, I was like, yeah, it's just how it is.
Same.
And so, like, literally, it's a lot of fear, to be honest. Like, growing up in a Chinese primary school, a lot of it is just fear. For example, I think I have so many examples. Look at me. Like back when in elementary school, like in primary school, you had to cut your fingernails every week just because, like, I don't know, cleanliness, and I still do it. Look at them, just
Wow.
shaping like I still cut my fingernails every single week. Um, and so they check every single week to see if like you cut your fingernails or not. If you didn't, then you kind of get either pulled to the back and go
Right.
like, yeah, this kid did something wrong this morning. Um, and then our homeroom teacher sometimes she would ask all of us to stand up, bring her cane, and look at our fingernails. And if they're not like adequately cut, like if they're not like this short, if there's just some bit of like white nail on it, she'd literally like take the cane and just like hit you like that.
Oh my
And
god.
that
Ouch.
hurts. It hurts even more than like hitting your own palm because that's what we're
Yeah.
used to. Because this is like there's more flesh here. Look at all this nothingness getting hit with a rattan cane, like with a rattan.
Yeah.
So literally that's like how it was like growing up in that place. And it's like I said, I don't regret it because that's like I've become such a disciplined human being as compared to all my peers, all my classmates. But it just definitely instills like ambitiousness, like discipline, and just like fear of failure.
Right.
And that's how, I guess that's probably, I don't know, a reason why the
Yeah.
Chinese are so good in the
Mm-hmm.
economy, because like we were brought up differently.
Yeah.
Whereas Malays, we were always sheltered in a way that like, yeah, you get scholarships just for being a Bumi Putra and stuff like that. And like you get to go to like these schools just because like, I mean, obviously you have to get good grades, get straight A's and stuff like that to go into boarding school. And Bumi Putras just have a lot of privilege, so that's why we end up being lazy, or we are what's it called, so dependent on the government. And that's why they have all these like matis who do not want the Bumiputra privilege to go away, because without it, it's not like they're nothing, but it's going to be a harder life because they don't have a lot to depend on, because they've been depending on their um, privileges as a Bumiputra. So, I mean, I wouldn't say Malays are lazy, because I guess that's like growing up, like my parents always be like, yeah, Malays are lazy, but like being part of society, after a while, I've met really hardworking and really smart like Malay
Yeah,
people.
like
Most
you.
of them are, yeah, okay, thank you. But they are not lazy, they're smart, they're hardworking. It's just that they still depend on the government for a lot of their things, just because
Mhm.
they, you know.
Yeah, but that's the thing with privilege, honestly. It's like
Mm,
you can recognize it in everything. Like for me, I recognize that I'm like super privileged, like in terms of, financial stability.
mm-hmm.
But and it's like I'm aware that it's not like ideal and that like a lot of like my success is because of that. But you still don't want it to kind of go away. Not to say that we're like advocating for corporal punishment, just saying
Of
that it
course,
builds a little bit of character.
a lot of character. I mean, I don't know. I
Yeah.
would kind of feel sad if they take it away, just because what are you doing? You're taking away this part of the child's childhood. But
Yeah.
I guess also like,
Back in my days, back in my days, we lined up at the back of the wall and got hit by our teacher.
literally, that's a very long-winded way of just trying to explain or like unpack how
It's
and why
yeah,
that's a thing. It's not because it's an ethnic gene sort of thing, or like
yeah,
someone in
definitely
the
not.
system telling go like, oh, you're Chinese, sure, you're gonna be rich now. It's the way they were brought up, the way
Yeah.
they're is like, it's different.
I mean, on a closing note, I guess I don't know. It's kind of somber, isn't it? Not very optimistic note, but I think I don't know. Will we be able to see like a big change during our lifetimes? Probably not. But I think
Probably not.
yeah, but I think a lot of our generation, who are like on social media and like, consuming more stuff and being more open-minded about things, like at least things like this, will kind of discuss these sort of so-called controversial or taboo topics that we don't usually get to hear about on, mainstream media or whatever. I don't even know what mainstream media is here anyway, like Astro Awani probably, but no,
Uh,
but yeah, we hope there is a solution and an alternative to that. Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you learned a thing or two about Malaysian culture and like language in Malaysia. Leave us questions, please, if you have questions. I don't know. I would have a lot of questions, but yeah, thank you. Bye. You want to say bye? Take care.